Ambassador Zekthara of the Dominion had seen many species attempt first contact protocols. In her 3 centuries of diplomatic service, she had witnessed civilizations grovel, threaten, bargain, and bluster their way through the initial meetings that would determine their fate in the galactic community. The humans, however, were proving to be remarkably unremarkable. The delegation from Earth sat across the crystalline conference table aboard the neutral station, orbiting Kepler 442b, their faces composed and professional. Captain Sarah Chen led the human contingent with the kind of military bearing that suggested competence without aggression. Dr. Michael Torres, their xenobiologist, had answered every question about human physiology with clinical precision, and their diplomat, Ambassador Elena Vasquez, had navigated the preliminary negotiations with admirable skill. Everything was proceeding according to standard protocol. The humans had submitted to the required biological scans, agreed to the temporary quarantine procedures, and demonstrated their technological capabilities within acceptable parameters. They were neither advanced enough to be considered a threat, nor primitive enough to be dismissed as irrelevant. They would likely be granted a minor system in the Outer Rim, and permitted limited trade rights. It was all terribly routine until the Kitten appeared. Zekthara first noticed the disturbance when Dr. Torres suddenly stiffened, his hand moving slowly toward his jacket pocket. The movement was subtle, but her enhanced senses caught the shift in his biorhythm immediately. Security protocol demanded she investigate any anomaly during first contact proceedings. "Dr. Torres," she said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made her species such effective diplomats, "is there something you wish to share with the Council?" The human's face flushed with what she recognized as embarrassment. It's nothing, Ambassador. Just a minor equipment malfunction." But Captain Chen was now staring at him with an expression that clearly conveyed both horror and resignation. Ambassador Vasquez had gone very pale. A tiny mewing sound emerged from Dr. Torres's jacket. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the table, representatives from a dozen species exchanged glances that ranged from confusion to outright hostility. The Crix delegate, an insectoid species known for their rigid adherence to protocol, began to emit the clicking sound that indicated extreme agitation. "What?" Zekthara asked very carefully. "Is in your jacket, Dr. Torres." With the air of a man facing execution, the xenobiologist slowly reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gray and white striped creature, with enormous green eyes and pointed ears. The Kitten looked around the assembly with the fearless curiosity that only the very young possess, then let out another plaintive mew. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. The Crix delegate shot to his feet, mandibles chattering in outrage. The crystalline Veltar representative's form flashed angry red. Even the normally placid mushroom folk began to emit spores of distress. "This is an outrageous violation of protocol," the Crix delegate screeched. "No biological specimens are permitted during first contact. This could be a weapon, a spy device, His tirade was cut short as the Kitten, apparently deciding that the tall insectoid was the most interesting thing in the room, made a magnificent leap from Dr. Torres's hands directly onto the conference table. It landed with perfect feline grace and immediately began to explore, tiny paws patting at the holographic displays floating above the table's surface. What happened next would be studied by xenosociologists for centuries to come. The Kitten, in its infinite wisdom, walked directly to Zekthara and sat down in front of her, tilting its head and beginning to purr, a sound unlike anything the assembled delegates had ever heard. The Dominion ambassador, a being who had negotiated the surrender of star systems and the fate of entire species, found herself staring into those impossibly large green eyes and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the universe. "What is it doing?" she whispered. "Purring," Captain Chen said quietly. "It means she's happy." The Kitten apparently decided that Zekthara was acceptable and began to rub against her arm. The ambassador's species communicated primarily through chemical signals and electromagnetic fields, but the warm pressure of the small creature against her limb conveyed something that transcended all of that. The vibrations of the purr seemed to resonate with frequencies she hadn't even known she could perceive. Around the table, something extraordinary was happening. The Veltar delegate's angry red hue had shifted to a curious orange. The mushroom folk had stopped producing distress spores and were instead emitting something that smelled remarkably like contentment. Even the Crix delegate had gone silent. though whether from shock or something else was unclear. The kitten, apparently satisfied with its conquest of Zekthara, began to make rounds of the table. It headbutted the Veltar crystal formations, which chimed in harmonics that sounded almost like laughter. It investigated the mushroom folk's spores with delicate sniffs, causing them to emit tiny puffs of what Dr. Torres would later identify as their equivalent of giggles. When it reached the crick's delegate, the massive insectoid froze as the tiny creature fearlessly rubbed against his chitinous leg. "Extraordinary," the Crix whispered, his earlier outrage completely forgotten. "It shows no fear, no territorial aggression. It simply accepts." Dr. Torres cleared his throat. "This is Luna. She's what we call a domestic cat. We've lived alongside her species for thousands of years. She was supposed to stay on the ship, but she has a talent for finding her way into places she shouldn't be." As if to prove his point, Luna had somehow managed to activate one of the holographic displays and was now batting at floating star charts with obvious delight. "You live with them?" Zekthara asked, still marveling at the warm weight of Luna's tiny body as the kitten returned to her. "They're our companions," Ambassador Vasquez explained, her diplomatic training finally overcoming her panic. "We share our homes with them, care for them, and they purr. But why?" The Veltar delegate chimed, his crystalline structure now a warm gold. "What purpose do they serve?"
Are they food?
"Tools, weapons?" Captain Chen smiled, and for the first time since the negotiations had begun, her expression was genuinely warm. "They're friends. We love them because they're soft and warm and they make us happy. That's all." The silence that followed was profound. In all the records of first contact, across thousands of species and millions of encounters, no one had ever admitted to keeping another species around simply because it made them happy. The concept was so alien, so fundamentally generous that it reframed everything the Council thought they knew about humanity. 3 hours later, after Luna had thoroughly charmed every delegate present and Dr. Torres had fielded approximately 200 questions about cat care, feeding habits, and the logistics of interspecies companionship, the Dominion voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership status with preferred trading rights and an invitation to join the Galactic Council. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Zekthara found herself reluctant to let Luna go. The kitten had spent the last hour curled in her arms, purring contentedly while the ambassador discovered muscles she never knew she had for something called petting. "Ambassador Vasquez," she said carefully, "would it be possible? That is, do humans ever share their companions?" The human diplomat smiled. "Ambassador, I think Luna has decided she likes you, and I believe our ship's cat Cosmos recently had a litter. Perhaps we could arrange a cultural exchange?" 6 months later, Zekthara's official reports to the Dominion High Command included detailed analyses of human diplomatic strategies, trade potential, and military capabilities. What they didn't include was any mention of the small gray tabby named Nebula, who had completely revolutionized her understanding of the concept of unconditional love. The galaxy, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to teach them how to purr.